All right. So, yesterday we left off at the fragmentation of the Abbassids and their downfall, that they needed help from some slaves because they couldn't enslave people that were Muslims, right? So today we're going to talk about that. So the objective is explaining the causes and effects of the rise of Islamic states. The Islamic states we're going to talk about in particular is the rise of the Turkish states. So it's a whole different culture, a whole different ethnic group than the Arabs, a whole different culture, a whole different group than the Persians. So again, historical development, fragmentation of the Abbasid Caliphate, and the spread of Islam. Okay. Now the words we're going to focus on is the Seljuk Sultanate, the Mamluk Sultanate, the Delhi Sultanate. Sufis will be on the next one. So again, fragmentation. Let's begin by talking about how it began to fragment. The Abbasids took control and they started to weaken by the 11th century. Again, the reason that they started to weaken is that they needed slaves. Okay, let's talk about how, you see, this is Islam, but they needed slaves. Where are they getting their slaves from? From Central Asia. Right? These guys are just nomadic pastoralists, but a lot of them are actually very, very good soldiers. They're elite soldiers. Like the Mongols, these guys from Central Asia can ride horses. Now, in the Seljuk Sultanate, Delhi Sultanate, and Mamluk Sultanate, once they do get created after the fall of the Abbasids, they began then to control the Silk Road, the Silk Trade, and then they lose that control to the Mongols later on. So again, however, even though they lose control to the Mongols, Islam continues to expand. So again, their origins, you look at them, and if you don't know anything about history, you would say, well, those were Mongols. Well, they're not. They're very, very similar to the Mongols in that they were expert archers and expert horsemen. They lived in the steppes, and they were nomadic pastoralists with very high military skills. Right? So like I said earlier, they were taken as children, purchased to be bodyguards, but they weren't slaves from what we know as slaves today. They weren't like slaves like in 1450. They actually rose and they were highly regarded in the society. As they rose, they took over the caliph masters, and the new leader was called the Sultan. You want to write this down. The Sultan has political power, but was not the religious leader. The caliph stayed as the religious leader. So kind of like a puppet, right? So now you have two leaders. One is the religious leader. The other one is the political leader. And the political leader, the Sultan, happens to be a Mamluk. So what did these Mamluks do, and how did they affect the rest of Afro-Eurasia? Let's focus on Anatolia first and the Seljuk Turks. So this is the Anatolian Peninsula, as you can see here. And let's see how these guys ended up doing and how they took over the entire peninsula. So as these Mamluks took over the Abbasid Empire, they began to go into the peninsula. They began to take it from the Byzantine Empire, and it was a brutal conquest where people were killed, churches were destroyed. The basic structure of government for the Byzantines was obliterated. People began to convert quickly or flee or die, mainly for many reasons, but mainly because it was also a monotheistic religion. They basically believe in the same God. One of the other reasons was the jizya tax. The tax meant that people had to pay it if they continue to be Christian or they continue to be Jews. So they figured, we pray to the same God. Let me try and get out of this. Another reason why there was 90% conversion is because the Turks ended up moving into the area. Now, later on, they would fall. Like I've mentioned before, they fall to the Mongols, right? But eventually, the Mongols ended up integrating into the society in this area. And the Ottomans, or the same Turks create the Ottoman Empire, who then completely destroys, by 1450, completely destroys the Byzantine Empire by taking over taking over Constantinople. Okay. The Anatolia Peninsula becomes fully Muslim, and the Turks emerge later on. To this day, the Anatolian Peninsula, called Turkey, is mostly people of Turkish background. Now, the next one we're going to focus on is Spain, or Al-Andalus, or Andalusia. Now you see this, the Andalusia, or Al-Andalus, was only in the southern part of Spain. In the northern part of Spain, you still had Christians. Okay, so we'll talk about that later on. You still have the French on this side. So in Spain, by 1711, Muslim Arab Berbers had had invaded Spain, called it Al-Andalus. So Muslim Spain at the time became one of the centers of learning in Europe, but in the Muslim world. By the time of 1000, about 75% of the people had converted, mainly to avoid the special tax, but also to move up in the society. But then by 1492, Christians reconquered the peninsula. Now that date might sound familiar, and it should. That's the date that Columbus sailed the ocean blue, but that's also, again, because in Anatolia, the Turks had taken over and were not allowing Christians to cross. So once Christians had taken over Spain again, they said, hey, now we can kind of go the other way. So here is a picture of the mosque in Cordoba. And like I said, the main thing about Muslim Spain is that it became a center of learning, which we'll kind of talk a little bit more about in the next lesson when we talk about the cultural transfers. Now, what Christians did bring to the Spanish Peninsula was intolerance. And as I mentioned before, comparatively speaking, the Muslims during this period of time were quite tolerant of other religions. Well, the Christians were not. As they came in, they were like convert or die, especially to the Jews. So then when they crossed the ocean and got into the Americas, that mindset of religious intolerance was already with them. So the next one is, okay, so I wanted to show a map of the gradual takeover of the peninsula by Christians, and eventually in 1492. Now the next one is India. Now for India, I'm not even going to discuss it. Heimler does a better job, so just use your notes from Heimler's history and put them there, retype them there if you want, or if you don't. But I do want to show you this map. So by 1909, right, what are the effects of this Muslim moving into the South Asian area? Well, Hindus did not convert, as you can see, right? As opposed to Spain and the Anatolian Peninsula, only 20% of the people of this area converted to Islam. So here you are. So most of them stayed in this region here, right? So by 1900, you ended up having kind of like a problem between these guys, a problem that originated around 700 when Muslims started invading the area. So if you superimpose the two, you see that this region and this region is highly Muslim, but there are still pockets of Muslims here, here, and here, and pockets of Hindus. Again, the religious difference would create antagonism and death of millions of people later on. So again, retype your notes. This empire in India would later fall, and be taken over. The reason that they fell, you type this little piece in there, that they did not have an efficient bureaucracy. They attempted to expand to southern India and did not, or were not able to defeat anybody in the southern peninsula. And they were finally defeated by the Mongols. And when they were defeated, they were replaced by the Mughal Empire. Mughal sounding a lot like Mongols, and I'll explain that later when we get to the next period. Mughal, Mongol. Seems like the Mongols took over everywhere. Yep, took over everywhere. Except this here, Egypt. So let's talk a little bit about Egypt and southern India. Not southern India yet, but let's talk a little bit about Egypt. So the Mamluks. Same reason that the Abbassids wanted to have slaves, for protection and whatnot. The Egyptian Muslims also took slaves, also called them Mamluks. They were also highly regarded, also very good militarily. Elite corps, sounding like somebody I don't like. Elite corps. They rose in government. Now, the two things that I didn't put down, I did put the Mongols that they're known for, is that they were able to expel the Mongols, and they were also able to, and you got to write this down, I didn't put it in there, they were able to expel the Christians with their crusades. So in Egypt, to this day, Egypt is mostly Muslim, with a very low percentage of Christians, although they were mostly Christians, Coptic Christians, by the year 500, 600. But again, Islam, 99% Muslims now, again, able to expel the major powers. Now, the main reason to know that the Abbasid Empire broke up and to understand that all of this happened is so that you understand that even though different types of government emerged, you no longer have a caliph, now you have a sultan, and you have these ex-slaves that came in, and knowing the reason why they needed slaves, you need to understand what the differences were when they did take over. So, example, mostly converted, and then Christians retook the area, mostly converted, didn't convert, mostly converted, and were able to expel people. Now in West Africa, we're going to kind of stop because that's going to be another video, and we're also going to go over it when we talk about networks of exchange. So we're going to leave that blank and we'll come back to it later. Okay, and that is the end, folks. No, not necessarily the end yet. So if you see this page 382 to 390 in Strayer, I'm not going to have you guys do this, but that's where the information is for India, Anatolia, and West Africa. So if you on your own want to read that part, go to it.